welcome you all with love. I welcome you with joy. And today we'll be talking about spiritual nutrition and the subtleties of it. And we will be discussing all levels of the subtle anatomy and how that relates to diet. This is information I've been working on since the mid-70s. As in my book, Spiritual Nutrition and the Rainbow Diet, as well as Spiritual Nutrition and the Awakening and Activation of Kundalini. So what are we talking about? The subtle anatomy is definitely affected by what we eat. So we have 72,000 nadis, 3 central nadis, Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna. So they are the main channels for moving the spiritual energy, also known in the yogic system as Kundalini. Okay? Now, the key is that when we clog the nadis with meat, fish, chicken, and dairy, it blocks the flow of the energy. Now, in the lecture, I'm going to be talking a little bit more subtly about tejas, ojas, and prana, which are a deeper understanding of how exactly what we eat affects the health and function of our nadis. Now, along with that is the chakra system. And we have petals, 50 petals, which have what we call 50 vertis, which are certain kind of thought forms that are connected with each chakra. And we eat in a way, again, that supports it. And that's part of what I call the rainbow diet, eating different colors of our food that actually supports the unfolding of the chakras. And then we also eat according to what we call the koshas, layers of the mind. And how do we eat in a way that supports layers of the mind? So in this lecture, I will be talking about all the layers. Okay, we're talking about the chakra system, we'll be talking about the nadis, we'll be talking about the koshas, we'll be talking about the subtle body, and how our diet affects that. So that gives you an understanding to support your overall dietary choices according to your constitution. Please go ahead and listen to the whole lecture and get the in-depth detail of how this really works. So I invite you to do that, and may you be blessed. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Takulas. So, welcome everybody. I welcome you with love. So today, we're actually talking about spiritual nutrition. What you see in front of you is the cover of my book, but it has a lot of information in it. So I mentioned there's 72,000 nadis, and 3 main ones, Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna. And what you're seeing are the 3 main ones at this moment. The red is the Pingala, the Ida is the purple, and the central column is called the Sushumna. So that's what you're seeing on this. And if you look a little closely, there's a subtle line in the very center of that. It's called the Brahma Nadi. If you can see it, if not, just know it's there. It's subtle, because it is subtle. And then above it is the right and left side of the brain. But the Brahma Nadi goes all the way to the top, where we see the mystical merging of the heavens and the earth, the sacred male and sacred female, with the Om side. So that's the big diagram. So think about the nadis now, and look at the red or look at the purple there, and you will see, you will understand as we're talking, that they need aligning. So there's 3 factors that go through this. Okay, you have the fire element, you have the earth-water element, fire, air, earth, water, and you have the prana. So we have kapha, pitta, vata, which we've kind of heard about on and off. And then the refined levels are kapha becomes ojas, the deep, primordial vigor. Pitta becomes tejas, which is the electrical and fire energy. And air becomes prana. Okay. Now, within those nadis, all three are happening. The ojas gives you the lining. It keeps things from burning through. People do excess pranayama, they create so much fire that you can have an imbalance that can burn through. That's not what you want. So we want to keep the balance. And the diet is about keeping the balance. If you're just going to do leafy greens, which are more prana focused, you're not going to develop the ojas. Now, in addition, the ojas gives a certain radiance off that adds to the flow of the Kundalini energy. So we had the three energies going through the nadis, and the nadis, as I explained before, are blocked by meat, fish, chicken, and dairy. So that's important to understand. So that's our model, okay, of the whole picture in a simple way. And it's important to be a little simple with the story. So, along with that, we have another level, which are the chakra systems. And if you note, subtly, in the chakra systems, there are petals on each chakra. And each of those petals has a certain thought form. When we do yoga each day, like here at the Tri-Yoga, we're actually balancing those petals, which are vertices. If they're excess, they come to balance. If they're deficient, they come to balance. So that's one of the things that actually happens in a more subtle level when we're doing the Tri-Yoga, is we're balancing the vertices of the petals of the nadis, which obviously is a good thing. And we do that every day. Now, when initial vision of the heart chakra, I only saw 8 petals. So, wow, I don't get it, what's going on. Because there are 12 petals. So, later, in researching it up, I saw there's an inner heart, anahata. And that's what had 8 petals. So that's what I was saying, but I didn't have the context to understand it until I did some research on it. So each of these petals then has a thought form. When we're imbalanced, those thought forms get imbalanced. And so when Patanjali says, Yoga Churti Verti Nirodha, yoga is quieting the vertices of the mind. When we're doing what we teach here, the Tri-Yoga, what's happening is we're balancing those vertices and quieting the mind. That's the key thing to understand. Now, this chart shows you all the different vertices that are connected with each one. That's a lot. There's 50 different petals, 50 different vertices. They're like major vertices. So just to give you an idea, you don't have to copy them all, right? It is in my book, but it's just to give you an idea of that. That's been worked out. Now, in addition, this kind of looks like an angel, doesn't it? In addition, the chakras are vortexes. And coming out of the vortex are energies. And those energies kind of create an auric field. Now, there's a little bit more to this, because I found that when people are doing drugs, they're not getting sleep, they're imbalanced in many ways, their endocrine system is off, because the endocrine system relates directly to the chakra system, that actually that's the place where they can get invaded by entities. And in working with people, as their chakra system and their endocrine system gets balanced, then this field around them gets balanced, and they're way less likely to have trouble with NFTs. Now, not everybody believes in NFTs. I understand all that, but let's just say, particularly at night, you have less sleep disturbances. But what I will tell you, because we are going to show you some things today, that people who are taking drugs, that's every single drug we're talking about, you know, like marijuana, cocaine, ayahuasca, they're all more vulnerable to invasion. The drugs are like wearing a bullseye. And when I talk to people who are, let's say, ayahuasca group leaders, they will admit that can happen. You see it a lot with marijuana. There was a major book on marijuana that came out maybe 4 years ago by an acupuncturist in Brennan. He also was noting that. So a variety of sources have noted that when you're doing drugs, and that includes alcohol, that's why it's called spirits, you're more vulnerable to invasion as a very real thing, whether you believe it or not. What happens. And when we strengthen then the endocrine system, which strengthens the chakra system, which strengthens basically your auric field, then what happens is you're far less vulnerable. That's the main concept. Now, today we're going to focus a little bit more on ojas, which is, I explained, this is a deep primordial vigor or reserve. It's fundamental to our life force. People have low ojas and will live shorter lives, will not be as healthy, not be as strong, and have difficulty with the energies possibly primitive. So ojas is important. So what do we need to know about ojas? Well, we need to know how to build it, right? So one of the most important things in building ojas is omega-3s, a long chain omega-3s, DHA and EPA. Yeah, long chain omega-3, DHA and EPA. And we find when people are low in those, they have a lot of imbalances. And accelerated aging, more heart problems, more brain problems, and we'll be talking about that in a minute too. But understand the long chain omega-3s are very, very important. In a vegan diet, we're going to get it from an herb called purslane. It's also found in an algae called E3 Live, Plymouth Lake. Those are two sources. And then what we want to do is emphasize the conversion factor. What converts short chain omega-3s to long chain omega-3s? Coconut oil. So 1 tablespoon of coconut oil, we're having nuts and seeds that contain the short chain omega-3s. We're talking about flaxseed, hemp seed, and chia seed in particular. Moves it from 1 to 3% conversion to 6 to 10% conversion, which is significant. So that way we can build that up. There is also a yellow algae, which is where the fish get their omega-3. So that is in production. It's a concentrated yellow algae. It's very high in omega-3s. Like to see people have about an input of 1,200 milligrams of DHA a day. Just give you a rough idea. DHA. That's a long chain omega-3.
Not DHEA. That's totally different.
That's totally different. DHA. Now this is important because it optimizes brain function. It has an anti-aging function and also an anti-cancer function, and truly enhances many levels of our neurotransmitter. DHA is important. More important than EPA, but they're both important. So we want to eat in a way or take a supplement in a way that's going to support that. So kind of keep that in mind. People say, well, what about fish? Well, obviously we're teaching a vegan message here, but fish are very high in EPA not so high DHA. There's about 2% EPA in fish. It's not as much as we think. When you do the fish oil, often it's contaminated with radiation, pesticides, and herbicides, so it has to be at a very high level. So the vegan way actually is safer because it's coming from omega-3s that are lower in the food chain. That's important. So plant-based protein. Well, what are your great plant-based proteins? Well, spirulina, chlorella, and E3 Live are about 60% protein. Think eggs are 44%. Meat, fish, and chicken are 16, 17, and 18% for perspective. It's good to know that. And they're about 90% assimilable, which is a very important part of the story. So we do have quite adequate protein on a vegan diet, and the key is we don't need that much. We need somewhere between 10 and 15%, and I mentioned the mTOR pathway, and what is that? That's the place where you have optimal longevity and optimal anti-cancer, and that's between 35 and 70 grams unless you're pregnant. So that's not a lot of protein. So we don't really have to worry too much. There's ample research out there that shows that vegans get possibly twice as much protein as we need. So we need to be mindful of getting too much protein. 35 to 70 grams. So 70 grams isn't a lot in the total for the day. So we'll keep that in mind. So what we're looking at is the green protein, so to speak. Bee pollen possibly is the most highly OJAS food. What is bee pollen? The semen of the plant world. That's as OJAS as you can get. And it's 15% really healthy, or high levels of omega-3s, 20% protein. It's got about 3,000 to 5,000 enzymes. You're talking a very high potency food. 1 to 3 tablespoons a day is all you really need here. Coconut oil is really important to convert. It's mid-chain fatty acids. It's been shown directly to help, in certain cases, Alzheimer's within like 4 days. Well, how come? Well, because it gets absorbed, gets transferred in the liver to ketones. And these ketones are the best fuel, 25% better for the brain and for the heart than sugar. So when people get insulin resistant with their Alzheimer's, which is a lot, it's almost we call it the third level of diabetes, this can turn around when you use a different fuel, which is called ketones, and particularly that we get from coconut oil. So coconut oil is extremely important, even in that one level. It protects one from cognitive decline and Alzheimer's, and has been shown within as quickly as 4 days to reverse, let's say, Alzheimer's process and reverse cognitive decline. That's significant. So it has a pretty big role in the big picture. And so I'm mentioning that because right now it's kind of under attack, so to speak, as it was in the 60s. And I will be speaking to that in the future on Facebook really today, as I'm talking about. Because it's so detrimental not to have a certain amount of protein. The other thing I find is that we need a certain amount of cholesterol in our system, about 160. And cholesterol is safe between 160 and 260. The research shows that. So if our cholesterol is too low, what happens? Well, we're more likely to have depression. If it's around 25% of what it should be, you're talking double depression. If it's very, very low, we're talking depression and suicide. If it's way low, it's 6 times more depression than suicide. That's significant. Low cholesterol is also associated with stroke, emotional imbalance, tendency to have accidents, cognitive decline, and Parkinson's, and other neurological diseases. Depression also, as I explained, is actually a really big deal. So all those things start to happen with a low cholesterol. So we have to be very, very careful of not getting low. High is not a problem. Women that live, have a cholesterol of 270 will live, according to a Norwegian study, they're going to live 28% longer. Not a problem. So don't worry about cholesterol. It's a big fear, but it's a false fear. And it's caused a lot of difficulties in terms of people's health because they've been promoting a high complex carbohydrate, low fat diet, particularly low saturated fat. And actually, that's not the healthiest diet. You need a certain amount of fat in your diet. We'll be talking about that a little bit more. But we also need it because it supports OJAS, which is the key concept. Because that fat is the DHA, EP, and EPA, which supports spiritual energetics. Hemp seeds, flax seeds, walnuts, chia seeds, all have the short chain omega-3s, which can be converted to long chain omega-3s with like a tablespoon of coconut oil. As I say, we go from 1 to 3% conversion to 6 to 10% conversion. So it's at least double or 3 times the conversion rate. Avocados are really a good source of fat. And nut and seeds, soaked nuts and seeds, the seed milks are also good sources of the omega-3s, as the ones I mentioned. Okay, now there are herbs, which we're not going to go to in great detail. There's a whole list. My favorites on the list in general are schizandra, which most people have heard of, and it activates all 12 meridians and all 8 of the 12 minor meridians. Gynostemia, which is extremely good for longevity. Shatavari is generally good for your overall health. Ginseng, American and Chinese ginseng. Rhodiola is very good for mind, brain functioning, memory. Goji berries. Now, goji berries are kind of tricky because when I initially measured goji berries on people, it raises the blood sugar. Okay, so we have the short-term effect, but then it turns out, when I look at the literature, long-term use of goji berries decreases your rate of diabetes. So we have short-term versus long-term effects, and it's important to see the curves in the things. Now, what else promotes OJAS, the deep primordial vigor, which is deeper in a sense than sexual energy? However, if your OJAS is low, you're not going to have very much sexual energy. It's kind of important to be aware of that. So we want to keep a certain OJAS, not just for sexual energy, but for spiritual life, because the OJAS lines the nadis, and if too much fire, air moves, it can burn through the nadis. So OJAS is very, very important for spiritual life. It's something that tends to get forgotten about in the traditional live food, which emphasizes the leafy greens, prana, and vegan diet, which tends to be a high carbohydrate diet. So keep that in mind. Now, lifestyle affects it too. You gotta understand that. Living in alignment. For example, as a mother, taking care of kids, that's dharmic living. That will actually build OJAS. Chanting, name of God, will build OJAS. Moderate sexual activity will build OJAS. Excess or depleted and not much, limited sexual activity will also deplete it, but moderate. Okay? And sense control. People lose a lot of their OJAS by getting caught in their screens, TVs, cell phones, because it's going out and you're not doing it. So it's very, very important to minimize our screen, I'm going to say screen addictions. It's hard to say what the cutoff point is but maybe not more than an hour a day. And it's possible, the research suggests that a lot of people spend at least 5 hours a day on their screens. So we want to kind of keep it to functional, how we do it. Now, what causes the OJAS depletion? Overworking, not enough sleep, major problem causing OJAS depletion. Okay, and it also raises your blood sugar. Literally, if you're missing sleep at a certain amount, the bottom line is 7 hours, your blood sugars will rise up to as many 15 to 20 points within 2 days. That's out there in the literature. So it's impressive, and I see it with the diabetics. So moderate, at least 7 hours sleep if you can. Best between minimum between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Obviously, that's only 4 hours, but that's the best time to make sure you're getting sleep. Just something to think about in the big picture. Overplaying can deplete. Excess sexuality can deplete. So all these things depleted. Moderation builds. So too much of a good thing creates depletion. That's really the key to understand that. Not enough of a good thing also depletes it. There is research out there in terms of men, but also with women, but more dramatic with men. 3 different major studies, one in England and 2 in the U.S., is that men who have sexual activity 1 to 3 times a week actually live 2 years longer. Women, it's about half a year longer. But it's still, sexual activity appropriately actually amplifies your hormonal secretions in a good way that keeps it at a certain balance. So it's kind of interesting evidence. These are research done maybe a total of thousands of people, so it's fairly valid, and there's 3 different research on the same. So there's a need for some level of sexual activity and the stimulation it gives to the total hormonal system. So there's some validity there just to think about. Now, you've heard me mention a number of times, animal, flesh, dairy, okay, meat, fish, chicken, and dairy. And I'm just reviewing it. It clogs the nadis, which is what we were just looking at, right? It disrupts the koshas, which I call the layers of the mind. I think that's important to understand. Layers of the mind. And we're going to look at some of that a little bit later in this lecture, but basically, the death energy of other sentient beings, meat, fish, chicken, and dairy, when we bring it into our system, disrupts the flow of energy, but also brings the energy of death into our more subtle levels of who we are, which are the chakras and the koshas. So ultimately, all those contribute to the blocking of the flow of the kundalini. I kind of learned about this in a backwards way. How did I learn about it? Because in 1976, myself and Dr. Lee Sanella, a physician, founded the Kundalini Crisis Clinic. What I observed is people were self-medicating with lots of meat, fish, chicken, and dairy to slow down the flow of the Kundalini. Didn't think of genius to say, well, fine, take that away and see what happens. You'll more accelerate the flow of the Kundalini energy once it's awakened. So it's easy for me to talk about animal flesh. It is a problem. Does that mean if you eat animal flesh you can't be enlightened? Didn't say that. It does interfere with the process. As the Buddha said in the Inns of Times, which we're attending to live in, he raised the question, how can a person and living off the life force of other sentient beings, expect to be enlightened. So that's a pretty strong statement. And just so you know, oh, well, what does that mean? Well, not really. When you're living in Tibet and there's no vegetables around, they kind of have to do that. But in 2005, the Dalai Lama actually said all the Buddhists should go back to being vegetarian. Just so you know that a shift has been made. Because that's the original teachings of the Buddha. It's also the original teachings of these things. It's also the original teachings of the Torah. The original teachings of the Vedas. So it's not like a new idea only belongs to one religion. Okay? That's the key thing. Okay. Now, this is really some animal research. These are neurons. This is the same post-LSD. So it gives you an idea. So a lot of people think it doesn't matter. It matters a lot. So this is called spectrophotometry. This is a normal brain. Okay, take a look at it for a second. That's a normal brain. It's people after people have been smoking marijuana. A lot of holes in the brain. You know, I kind of learned about it. Didn't have this kind of graphic detail, but I was doing research on THC in 1972 as a sleep medication. It's hypnotic. And of course, to get THC from the government, you had to jump through more than a few hoops. And one of the things that impressed me is that when people have been smoking marijuana for more than 20 years, they had significant cognitive decline and mental function. Now, it doesn't have, again, the kind of level of detail that we're looking at here, where there are really holes in your brain. This is another one, a 16-year-old, just 2 years smoking marijuana, holes in the brain. A 38-year-old with 20 years of daily use, holes in the brain. This is a 28-year-old just with weekend use. You see, you know, it's potent. We have all those holes, it makes us more vulnerable to intimidation. Now, paradoxically, I am not against keeping marijuana illegal. How come? Well, because people are going to do it anyway, we should not get people going to jail for it. We should have it like, if we're going to do it, we're not going to be able to stop. It's just like prohibition and alcohol. Alcohol is really terrible, way worse than marijuana. But there are some real problems with marijuana people don't really want to talk about. As I say, I did research in the 70s because of what I had to do, you know, because I was doing this THC research. So, in the first hour after smoking, there's a 4.8 increase in heart attack. No one's ever heard that. I guarantee. Yeah, has anyone ever heard of that? No. So that's my point. So as we kind of probe in the research, as I have done, that's the CDC. Not that they're that reliable, but for something like this, I think it's a statistical thing. British Medical Journal, you know, that within 3 hours of smoking, you doubled your risk of a car accident. Okay, because your judgment isn't as good. Most important, which is a huge problem, is it disturbs the brain development of teenagers. And it's mostly around relationships and intimacy. And even if you stop smoking, that still lasts like into at least the late 20s. That is significant because the ability to be in relationship, the ability to be intimate is part of really at least a Western spiritual life. Okay? These are all high-level research that's going on. Okay? Intimacy is a problem, as I say. Another problem is it really impacts brain development overall at a more subtle level. And that's what we need to be aware of, and they don't talk about it. So what are we talking about? Well, kids who are smoking pot are 60% less likely to finish high school. Think about that. That's huge. Okay? Now, that's research from the Washington Post. But I actually, when I lived in Central Holland for 3 years, in the mid-60s, the politically active Afro-Americans, okay, they were quite aware of it. They were quite aware of all these drugs coming into the community that made people more docile, but dysfunctional. So there was a large kind of movement, not that successful, to go against the drug dealers. Okay? And in Colorado, which will be the first amount of, let's say, results of it being legal, we're looking at like a 57% increase in all kinds of problems, but mostly, again, school problems, getting expelled, and emergency room visits. So 60%, 57%, that's pretty close. Now, traffic fatalities, same thing. Where marijuana has become legal, we're looking at a 100% increase in traffic fatalities. In New York, they're seeing an increase up to about 12% of traffic fatalities were more directly related to marijuana smoking, so that's a lot. So basically, whenever you're going to use, it becomes legal, there will be an increase in traffic fatalities, fatalities associated with marijuana, primarily associated with marijuana. And of course, the rate is high in most school systems, and it goes up to 42, 43% in the Afro-American community and the Latino community. Okay. Now, what I see as a psychiatrist is that there's certain people who have a predisposition to going psychotic and schizophrenic with marijuana. That is for real. I see a certain amount of people each year who actually have that problem. They smoke marijuana, they go crazy. And so it's going to activate those tendencies. Okay? And particularly with schizophrenia, people who smoke marijuana with schizophrenia, it really can make it worse. Okay? It does create sexual dysfunction, particularly in men. It is the number 2 cause of people being admitted to drug treatment centers. Marijuana. Okay, we're not talking about heroin, nothing about methadone or cocaine. Number 2 cause of being admitted to drug centers. Wow, it's not so good. Okay. Plus, it's getting more and more strong. And part of the brain degeneration that it causes is actually creates a decrease in IQ. So we're looking at a variety of things, and I mentioned a little bit earlier, entity invasion. So that's well documented. I've certainly observed it. I really won't even do any kind of entity removal as people are committed not to be doing drugs, particularly marijuana. Okay, so because of the tars associated with upper respiratory infections, but again, the biggest thing is cognitive development is damaged. That's really not what we want as we're trying to make it in the world, okay? Basically, as I learned in 1972, reviewing it, it does cause brain cell destruction. That's probably the most important thing I want to get. That's why you're seeing all the holes in the brain as we look at it. Heroin, methadone, They're not too different. Okay? So we see again a lot of holes in the brain from these things. And I remember in the 60s saying, I don't think there's a big difference between heroin and methadone, except you don't get high with methadone. Right? It's still addicting, it's still damaging. This kind of research I'm showing you is making the point. There's lots of holes in the brain. Okay? Cocaine is one of the, it's super addictive, but it's another example of how these drugs disrupt brain function. Cocaine and methamphetamines. So it goes on with that, and we have very clear evidence on this level. Alcohol, again, we know about brain degeneration with alcohol. That's well established. Wernicke psychosis and all the things we see. This is giving you the graphics of that. You're actually seeing what these pictures look like. Now, the good news is if you stop these things, your brain begins to heal. Okay? This is like a year after you stop. There is significant healing. There are some holes, but there's significant healing. So one of the first things you can do to heal is actually stop it. I mean, that may seem obvious, but that's where we start. Now, in my work as a psychiatrist, I've actually developed a variety of ways to help people's brains repair. Okay? And I work with people, and we get some pretty good results. Live food is very important because it stimulates neurotransmitter activation. But there's some other things we can do that can actually make a difference, a significant difference within a few months. So there is hope once you wake up and saying that there's a problem. Okay. So hope for healing, we can see the change that goes on. So this is important when we're talking about ojas. The brain is part of the ojas. So if you're going to disrupt the ojas, okay, taking drugs is a very powerful way to disrupt and weaken the ojas. I'm not recommending it. I'm just saying it does do that. Okay. Now, kind of a summary of what we talked about, meat, fish, chicken, and dairy, is that each product or food we take into our bodies has a certain energy. You have a lot of adrenaline, you have a lot of fear, and it creates chaotic vibrations. We got pain, fear, torment. One of my enlightened teachers in India, gurus, Swami Prakashananda, put it this way: when you kill an animal, you create pain, fear, misery. And when you eat the flesh of the animal, that pain, fear, and misery comes into you, and the result is disease. And in a more refined way, the result is agitation of the mind. Okay? And when we think yoga, chirti, virti, nirodha, yoga is decreasing the agitation of the mind, decreasing the activities of the mind. Clearly, it was very much against the overview, the over principles, okay? It disrupts the sounds in the mind. That's the key. This is what I'm saying. Yoga, chirti, virti, nirodha is a key principle. It's not the final thing because we want to go beyond the mind, but we certainly need to decrease the activities of the mind, which is why we do the 6 foundations, the 7-fold peace. Meditation is so important, but also eating low in the food chain and not eating too much because we're not taking that food, misery, and pain into us. That's key. So that's why, again, almost all the great traditions do indeed recommend a vegan or, at this point, vegan diet, but slight dairy. Now, I understand the Muslim world doesn't recommend it. We do have at least 2 examples of people in the Muslim world who are Rabia, for example, a great enlightened being, who were vegans. So they don't say you can't be a vegan. It's not exactly an emphasis. Okay, so that's the story with that one. So this is my very first book, Rainbow Green Life Food Cuisine, or Spiritual Nutrition, the Rainbow Diet, actually, is what I'm saying. And all the chakra systems are related. They all have a frequency, and our foods that we take feed the different chakras according to their colors. Red foods are going to feed the base chakra. Orange will feed the more sexual chakra. Yellow, the manipura, the solar plexus chakra, and so forth. Green, the heart chakra. So what I want you to see again is the colors, the foods, and the phytonutrients that are in there. So we'll take a look a little bit. So in the red level, we're looking at tomatoes and red peppers and cherries and raspberries. These are things. It's the outer color. And there are particular phytonutrients that we get that are very, very healing for us. Resveratrol has been shown to be definitely anti-aging, and it helps with blood sugar. Ellagic acid, lycopene, quercetin, these are all really good phytonutrients for your overall health. So when we go to orange, which is really the carotenes. So what do we have? We have carrots, we have squash, yams, sweet potatoes, not regular potatoes. I don't recommend those, they're 100% glycemic. But pumpkins, apricots, cantaloupe, which have that kind of look, mangoes, they're all that orange color. And yellow, the flavonoids, limonene. And so we're looking at solar plexus chakra, and mostly we have fruits like citrus fruits, and lemons, and grapefruit, oranges, yellow peppers, peaches, nectarines, pears, pineapples. These are all kind of active in the solar plexus. Heart chakra is green, so the leafy greens, arugula, lettuce, beet greens, which are the top of the beets, collard greens, all the greens, Brussels sprouts, they're all really good for the heart chakra. And the particular things that are in it are the indole-3 carbanols, the thiocyanates, zeaxanthinines, which are very good for your eyes, incidentally, sulforamines, lutein, which is also good for your eyes. So that's the heart chakra. Again, the green outer color matches the chakra frequencies. And then the throat chakra, blueberries, bilberries, things like that, which are good. And then third eye, which is kind of like a purple energies. You got raspberries, grapes, strawberries, mostly fruit. But eggplant. Eggplant is actually good for the third eye. Lycopene, terpenes, and anthocyanins are highest in these foods. Phytonutrients. So there's some idea that you're feeding each level a certain amount of phytonutrients. Now, what I don't recommend is we just eat one color. We really need to eat the full rainbow because we create melons. And the white, which is more the crown, or looking at more cauliflower, cabbage, and onions, and garlic. These are things that activate, and they contain sulfides, which are very good for you. Quercetin again, and isothiocyanins. So what we're seeing is the rainbow approach. So we want to eat a full colored spectrum of the rainbow each day to bring the full rainbow and chakra stimulation in and chakra feeding in. That's the key of the spiritual nutrition and rainbow diet. That's the rainbow diet. Now, another understanding is live foods bring electrons and protons into the system, and they actually charge your battery. That's what we want to look at. They charge your battery. And we are like a human crystal. Our bones are like a physical crystal, but our cells are the human liquid crystals that we're talking about. Let me just get some drink here. So that's a consideration that we're both solid and liquid crystal. So we kind of think about it that way. And there's a play there that actually works for us. So we have our bone, a liquid, it's a solid crystal. It's holding a vibration rate. And our brain, which is more of a liquid crystal, holds a vibration rate. And we're interacting with the cosmos, but we're also interacting with our food, and we're also interacting with our organs. Everything is talking to everything else. That's what I'm trying to say. So our cells put out a little antenna, well, we need this supplement, we need this nutrient, we need some copper, we need some iron, we need whatever we need. They're putting out a message. The kidney puts out a message. The organs are putting out a message. And our frequency, big frequency generators are the heart and the brain. So what we know is they've done research at HeartMath. They show that there's a field that goes out at least 50 feet affecting the environment. At least 50 feet from the human organism. That's impressive. So we're taking in all kinds of energies. If we're barefoot on the earth, we're taking in energies. From the earth, we're taking the solar energies, we're taking cosmic energy. The point is to be open to that. And we see that the plants take in the solar energy with the photosynthesis. In the middle there is the magnesium in the structure, and then that's the chlorophyll structure. And then that converts to a hemoglobin structure. It's the same structure, only inside we have chlorophyll, the magnesium in the chlorophyll, and we have hemoglobin in hemoglobin has iron in the center. But it's the same structure. So when we take in the foods from the environment, we're really taking in foods that are bringing the cosmic energy, solar energy, and then it converts as it goes to the bone, it sends out frequency to the whole body that maintains and builds the frequency. That's kind of subtle. The organs, again, with your antennas, once the energy goes through the bones, then it's ready to be shared with the rest of the body. Again, the bones are your fixed crystalline structures. They do make a difference. Now, when we meditate, we're feeding the brain. Other things that feed the brain, we really need B12, folic acid for brain function, particularly B12. So the frontal lobes in the front of the brain shrink about 1% a year. But what's going to build that up? Meditation builds it up. We've seen that. Also, a certain amount of B12 supplementation builds it up. And you want a B12 between 300 and 400 at least. Now, inside the brain, we have the anterior cingulate right there, parietal lobes right here, and the hippocampus, brain memory areas here. So, what is that about? So, with meditation, we're building the frontal lobes, we're activating the anterior cingulate, which brings a sense of love and peace. And we start to nullify the parietal lobes. And what that does is it opens us up to more a cosmic frequency, oneness with the divine. When the parietal lobes are slowed, are kind of slightly deactivated energetically. And the same thing happens what we call in the hippocampal area, is that's emotional balance or imbalance. When we meditate, we kind of deactivate it enough so love and peace begins to show through. So meditation activates certain areas, frontal lobe and anterior cingulate, and tends to deactivate, like the parietal lobes, which allow you then to have that cosmic experience. So that's just a little bit of an understanding. Now, the next question is, if I define spiritual nutrition including a total lifestyle, which is what I do, we kind of have to look at it. So the very first foundation is live food, 80% live food, 100% vegan. That's number one. Two, green juice fasting. I use dilute green juice twice a year. The second thing we do is build the prana, nefesh, life force, chi. And we do that with the different yoga practices, the pranayama, qigong, tai chi. So we're building that up. And then we have service and charity. Now that burns karma, but it also connects you at a heart level. It expands your heart consciousness. And some of the research suggests that in the heart we have at least 40% neurons. So the heart is really an active brain at the same time, and that starts to open us up. That's a very interesting finding. So it's a very good way to burn karma as well. Then we have spiritual guidance, working with a spiritual teacher. We have Regia, Rebecca. These are all things that kind of help us go more deeply into our oneness, our humility, our ability to distinguish between the cosmic reality and the temporal reality, our ability to really begin to see ourselves as multi-level beings walking between the worlds. The fifth foundation, which we call silence, meditation, and prayer, and repeating the name of God. Okay? And finally, as much Kundalini waking and activation as possible. So that's the 6 foundations. Now, I'm bringing in the idea of the koshas, which are the layers of the mind. So we have Anandamaya kosha, Kamamaya kosha, Manomaya kosha, Jnanamaya kosha, layers of the mind. Okay? We're looking at the first 3 koshas, and we see in this crossing between the 6 foundations and the layers of the mind, a lot of amplification for the first 3 koshas with the life or die. It plays a much bigger role. Again, building prana, it plays a much bigger role to do these prana building practices in terms of activating the first 3 koshas. Service and charity, again, it activates more what we call karma kosha. And spiritual guidance. It's going to work with the higher koshas. Now the next level is Ati-Manasa kosha, Jnanamaya kosha, and Haranamaya kosha. So at Ati-Mana kosha, that's where we first begin to experience the divine kiss. And that's where Shaktipat activates. That's where we start to feel the desire for God. So it's at that level. And so spiritual fasting will activate it, but again, as I said before, you can't eat the way to God. So we have that understanding. Yoga asanas, pranayama, they don't really start to touch these higher levels. Like they touch the first 3, they don't touch so much that. Service and charity doesn't necessarily touch the higher levels, which is again the desire for God. Ati-Manasa kosha, Jnanamaya kosha is kind of the subtlety of the mind that distinguishes between the temporal reality and the ultimate reality. And finally, Anandamaya kosha or Haranamaya kosha, same, which is the non-causal bliss, non-causal joy, non-causal love, non-causal peace, non-causal contentment, and that calls it compassion, they're all coming from within us. And our practices begin to activate it. And they're no longer practices, they become a way of life. That's the key. It's called serve God with love and joy. So this way of life, which I call Sanatana Dharma, helps us. It's a natural way of living that brings us to liberation. And in specific, we're talking about a natural way of living, the 6 foundations and 7 4 Ps, that activates and develops the layers of the mind called koshas, which we've been considering. So, spiritual guidance, we've talked about, it plays a much bigger role at the Atimanasa kosha, Jnana kosha, and Ananda kosha. So having a spiritual teacher has much more meaning for the developing the higher layers of the mind. And that's a kind of a key thing we'll talk about. It is Jnana yoga as well, but it's really all the higher teachings, including the spiritual wisdom teachings. I think that's an important thing to understand, spiritual wisdom teachings. That's what we're talking about. And the yin, the silent, shakti, we're looking at all these things. It supports not so much the lower levels, but it supports the upper 3 levels of the koshas. Kundalini supports all levels, okay? And then, but what's very much supported by silent is really going to be the Atimanasa kosha, okay, Jnanamanasa kosha, and Hamanasa kosha. So meditation, chanting, prayer, they all activate these higher levels of the mind, which is what I'm talking about. And Kundalini actually activates all 6 levels and builds all 6 levels. So this is, we become not only superconductors in the mind, but we really become a vortex of the divine energy. That's where this takes us. Now, that takes us to another point. As Thomas Edison said, the function of the body is to carry the great arm. That's everything we've been talking about. You want a healthy body so it can support the highest level of brain and spiritual function. That's the concept. We want to eat in a way that minimizes inflammation. Gluten's a big issue, and a high carbohydrate diet tend to create inflammation of the brain. Okay? Now, this is really significant. When we know that, for example, in the vegan world, they're often recommending a 70% carbohydrate diet, which I absolutely do not recommend. And I think it's out of date information. But what we see is people 70 or above, and I'm kind of using that as I mentioned before, and this is the Alzheimer's Journal, have 4 times the amount of cognitive decline when they're eating a higher carbohydrate diet. So that's obviously not what you want to do, period. But with age, it becomes much more an issue. So we want to be moving more to a protein and fat-based diet. Okay? And people eating the healthy fats have 42% less cognitive decline. So what I'm saying, 2 things. Cognitive decline decreases, minimizes with a healthy plant-based diet. In this case, it wasn't plant-based, it was just all fat, saturated or not. And eating a higher carbohydrate diet is going to create more brain inflammation and significantly more cognitive decline and a higher risk of Alzheimer's. That's pretty important information, okay? Now, along with the carbohydrate diet is a very simple statement. When the blood sugars go up, the neurotransmitters go down. I'll say it one more time. The blood sugar goes up, the neurotransmitters go down. That's a big deal. So we need plenty of norepinephrine, we need plenty of GABA, which is a relaxing. I think dopamine is the pleasure centers. All those become minimized with a higher carbohydrate diet. So Nick Lustig said something really interesting. He said, nature made sugar hard to get, man made it easy. As it sells well. Okay, right. So fructose is another thing. Well, that's not glucose. Well, that's right. Fructose does not directly raise your blood sugar. That's true. But indirectly, it contributes very, very much so to diabetes. So in the 80s, when they introduced the fructose in a big way, high fructose corn syrup in a big way, we had a 90% increase in diabetes. And it does it by disorganizing the insulin and leptin signaling, which are key for non-diabetic function. So it's a big problem, the fructose. So it's not a substitute for glucose. And in fact, research shows that cancer cells love glucose 10 times more than regular cells, and they love fructose 10 times more than they love glucose. So the message is clear. Stay away from fructose. Now, does that mean you can't have any fructose? You can't have any fruit, which is high in fructose. What it means is we want to keep it to 15 to 25 grams a day. And the average American is taking somewhere between 81 and 100 grams a day of fructose. So we want to minimize that in our life. That's what we really want to do in the big picture. And that's good. So the A1C is the amount of glucose, or really fructose too, that are connected to hemoglobin. It's a measure. And they found the people with the highest A1C in pre-diabetes is between 5.7 and 6.4. Above 6.4, we're talking about diabetes. The highest A1C actually doubled the amount of brain loss, brain cell loss. That's significant. Okay? And the higher the A1C, the higher is the tendency for depression. So in diabetes, we have at least double the amount of depression that goes on because the A1C is higher. Fat, that's our evolutionary source of energy. They did a kind of interesting study. People basically with the highest cholesterol levels, had the best cognitive results. So high cholesterol, again, 160 to 260 actually improves your brain function. That's what I want you to hear. But on the other hand, people with the highest sugar in their system had the most amount of brain shrinkage. So we want more fat, less carbohydrate. Okay? Associated with that, research is showing a higher rate of Alzheimer's, okay, in people who had lower cholesterol. Think about that. It's all the same kind of message. So omega-3s are another kind of fat, are extremely important. When you have adequate omega-3s, you're going to have 60% less dementia, obviously going to Alzheimer's. That's significant. 60% less dementia when you have adequate omega-3s. And I'm mentioning about 1,200 milligrams of DHA is what we're talking about. That picture gives you a range. These are research values. I mean, this is kind of what they did the research with. So, without a doubt, without a question, higher cholesterol is associated with better memory function. Okay. So just kind of keep that in mind. There's a lot of references I literally have hundreds of references in my There's a Cure for Diabetes book, because this is an extremely important piece. When you take sugar out of your diet, what are you going to put in? Well, I discovered is fat is the way it should have been to begin with, not carbohydrates as the emphasis. So lots of references here. There's just no doubt about what we're talking about. Plant-based fats, raw plant-based fats, are quite positive good. Lots and lots and lots of references. Okay. Women with the higher cholesterol, again, 270, up to that much, had much improved longevity and heart protection. Not bad. This Norwegian study of approximately 52,000 people ages 20 to 74, again showed women with a cholesterol of 270 had a 28% less mortality compared to women with a cholesterol of 193 or less. That's significant. Just gotta stop worrying about fat. All these 10% low-fat diets, they're actually dangerous. Okay? This is in the overall thing over the last 30, 40 years, the rate of the research on this question is a lot. And one meta-analysis, like 21 studies, 340,000 people, okay, that's a lot. They found no difference in people in heart disease, because that was the question. People who had the lowest and the highest intake of saturated fat. So I'm going to say intake. Now we're going to the next level. There was research done and reported in the Archives of Internal Medicine, which is the very well-respected journal, the AMA journal, so to speak. And what they found is that with a cholesterol between 160 and 260, there is absolutely no increased incidence of heart disease. That's significant, okay? So no problem about your saturated fat intake, as long as your cholesterol remains between 160 and 260. So keep it in mind why it just saves you worrying about this. If you're a vegan, we really do not have to worry about a cholesterol issue. The biggest worry is low cholesterol. Okay, just to keep it in mind. If we go less, and what we see if your cholesterol is low is you're going to have more emotional imbalances, more strokes, more violence, more accidents, more memory decline, and more likely to get Parkinson's disease. So it's pretty significant. We want to keep our cholesterol minimum 160. So it's an easy range. Depression with a low cholesterol, if it's about 25% of what it should be, well, I don't think so, right? If you're in the 25th percentile out of 100, it's about double. When it gets low, depression and suicide go to 6 times more. 6 times more suicide with really low cholesterol. Pretty significant kind of statement. And part of that is low cholesterol is associated with low serotonin. Serotonin creates an anti-depression physiology. Okay? So we're talking about all those levels that really are pretty important. So the research also shows that if your cholesterol is below 160, you're going to have a 21% increase in premature deliveries. So you kind of think about that versus a 5% rate. So it really makes a difference, and that's why we need adequate long-chain omega-3s. Okay, the research suggests that we protect about 96,000 people from premature death. And that's pretty significant, okay? And so it decreases the risk by about 85%. My goodness, isn't that significant? That's that simple. So omega-3s are important. I particularly have noted that they're important for postpartum depression. What happens is that children take the DHA from the mother, and because they need it for brain development, okay, and neurological development, and the mother will get depleted in DHA and gets postpartum depression. And I've seen women who have been in postpartum depression for 10 years. And in 3 weeks, giving them high amounts of DHA, EPA, their depression goes away. It's really quite significant. It plays a lesser role in bipolar disorders, where I'm seeing very, very high success rate with DHA for postpartum depression. Gotta take the history. When did it come out? Well, it was a few weeks after I had my baby. Okay, manic depressive, it's a little bit less direct, but maybe close to 80%, dramatically improve when you have a proper amounts of your long chain omega-3. So I am very much against, based on my clinical experience as well as all the results out there, of doing a low plant-based fat diet or a low fat diet, period, because you run into a shortage of your omega-3, long-chain omega-3s, which are associated with a whole lot of troubles. Okay, and when they look at soldiers, and soldiers have done a lot of suicides, and they studied soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan, they basically found those with the lowest omega-3s, that's the key thing to understand, had the highest rate of suicide. It all is the same message again and again. So the omega-3 stimulate the GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, which is anti-anxiety, has anti-depression, problems, anti-panic attacks. That builds up in our system, okay, with the omega-3s. It also improves the secretion and manufacturing of acetylcholine, which is one of the prime memory neurotransmitters. We really need to have that. It's a big deal. So we need the long-chain omega-3s for treatment of any depression, bipolar disease, postpartum depression, very, very significant. And so when we push this low-fat diet, and I fault a little bit the vegan movement for not keeping up to date with the data. So the message confuses people because people are, I think it's one of the top 2 paranoias in America is fear of high cholesterol. Now, in my book on There's a Cure for Diabetes, I discuss this a little bit. And in 1954, some of the research came out. What happens, there are like 24 studies, and about 6 of them supported this person's thesis that high cholesterol wasn't good for you. The other 18 didn't. What we call it cherry picking. You pick the 6 and make a big deal of it, and everybody thinks it's high cholesterol is a problem. And it's never been a problem. So all the research since the 50s really has pretty much debunked that we want that high cholesterol is a problem. Again, between 160 and 260 is really what I'm talking about. But when we go to a low-fat diet, because then you have vegans, 10% low-fat diet, we are creating deficiencies in cholesterol, but also the long-chain omega-3s and the short-chain omega-3s. So we don't want to do that, too much of a problem. And when people have adequate omega-3s, it decreases the tendency for impulsivity, or reactivity, or hostility. Big deal. Particularly middle-aged women, postmenopausal women, there's a tendency to have a high cholesterol, which isn't really so good for you. So the high cholesterol, cortisol, and it cuts down the cortisol by about 50%. So what we see is, instead of peaking like that, particularly in postmenopausal women, we get a curve like that, which is very preventative, because cortisol is like the death hormone. It's a very destructive, energetic. So it's catabolic, destructive versus anabolic. And so again, we want to have enough long-chain omega-3s to make this all work. Okay? Long-chain omega-3s are best suited for your heart. People with cardiac arrhythmias are 85% less likely to die if they have a long-chain omega-3s. It lowers blood pressure. It protects against skin cancer. Cuts about breast cancer by about 50%. And also decreases prostate cancer. So, wow, this is a pretty significant thing. We want to keep a high level of omega-3s. So what I gave you a range is 1,200 milligrams. I'm going to say 1,200 to 1,600 roughly is a good amount to take in. Lots of references to support this. You know, there's just a lot of evidence to support everything I've just told you. And ultimately, we want to eat in a way that helps us become super conductor of the mind. So, we come back to a theme you've heard me say again and again. In each generation, we're given the medicine for healing that generation. And our generation, the medicine and gift we're given is a holistic, veganic, organic, at least 80% life diet. It's the medicine for now and also into the future. We'll be blessed with these understandings.